Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I am Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States and its allies have rallied in support of Ukraine. But what does this war mean for the United States and for African Americans? Well, the question for tonight is, should African Americans care about the Ukraine or focus on our fight to achieve racial equality in this country? Well, let's get down to business. The business of being Black today is, should Black people care about Ukraine? Please welcome the Associate Professor at the University of Central Florida, Dr. Larry Walker. Hi, Dr. Walker.
Hey, Tammi, how you doing?
Great. Comedian and producer Shane Forbes is here. Hey, Shane.
Hello. Hey, what's up?
Hello, Associate Professor at Africana Studies at Stony Brook University, Dr. Zebulon Maletsky is in the house. Hi, Dr. Zebulon.
Hey, Tammi, good to be here. Good to be back.
Thank you, yes. And PhD candidate in Global and Sociocultural Studies at Florida International University, Kimberly Dawn Miller is on board today. Hi, Kimberly.
Hello, Tammi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Kimberly. Let's kick this thing off. Why should Black people care about Ukraine?
Well, Tammi, I'll go ahead and jump in and start this topic off. So I think that there are three reasons, primary reasons why Black folks should care about what's going on in Ukraine. I think the first one is just in terms of what we've seen the last couple of weeks after Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's inflation, right? So, Tammi, there's a saying that when America gets a cold, Black folks get pneumonia, right? So in terms of inflation, what we see is food prices, gas and oil going up, et cetera. One of the things I don't think people think about when they think about the invasion of Ukraine is the impact it has on things like microchips, right? So Ukraine and Russia provide materials that provide microchips, which go in cars, right? So when you have a shortage of that, sometimes factories have to shut down, et cetera. Two other things I think is important, Tammi, as it relates to COVID-19, right? So the reason why I'm highlighting COVID-19 is we found out what kind of happens in a global pandemic, right? So there's an impact that reverberates throughout the world. So COVID-19 started in China. Millions of people have died. Almost 1 million people in the United States have passed away. So we have to think about what happens to Ukraine from a global perspective. And, I think the last thing we have to talk about is just generally in terms of what would happen if we had a traditional war with Russia, right? So I can talk about in terms of what may happen. We have some kind of people would describe more like a cyber war back and forth between Russia and the United States. But we have a traditional war, which no one wants to happen, despite some of the rhetoric. You got to remember, like 13-14% of folks in the U.S. armed services are Black folks, right? So we think about the loved ones, people we have in our family that we care about. So there's three kind of primary reasons.
There's a lot of reasons. Those are definitely a lot of reasons to care. Dr. Maletsky.
Yeah, no, I think
why should Black people care?
Well, a lot of people have been feeling kind of like this war doesn't really have anything to do with Black folk. People I've spoken to, not really making the connection. They've heard about some of the things going on, African students, for instance, being turned away and being ridiculed. They've heard some of the racial slurs being used and stuff like that. I read something the other day was saying that, that Black folks there, Africans could be, be prepared for the N-word being used and stuff like that. So there's a lot of problems that sort of on the surface seem like there's a disconnect, but in fact, there's a lot of shared history there. First of all, there's the Black presence in Russia itself that goes back a long way. People like Alexander Pushkin and this famous writer and other legacies there. The term Caucasian itself is like coming from Russia as well, Caucasus Mountains. So it has reverberations for our experience in the United States in various ways. And then overall, just the oppression that's being exerted upon this ethnic minority. That has a mirror sort of image to the Black experience in some ways, if we take time to explain it. And if we take time to talk about it, which I don't know, that's why I'm so glad you're doing this show, because this is the only time I've ever seen anybody ask that question.
Yeah, but you know what, though? I hear what you're saying, but it's hard to have empathy for people who are not empathetic to us. we're always saving the world and saving America, and black women save the Democratic Party, and it just doesn't seem like there's any empathy for us. And I understand what you're saying, that it's one ethnic group being oppressed, but Americans are being oppressing, Americans are oppressing black people all the time. So I understand why people don't have any empathy, especially when you see some of the videos coming out of Ukraine where they're like, black person this, N-word that, and I'm supposed to like take up for you. It's like, yo, you're gonna have to catch that smoke on your own then.
But Shang, Dr. Milewski does make a point when he says there are black soldiers that we have that may end up having to go there. And I just saw a news story about a brother who was in Ukraine, who played basketball for Ukraine, which means there are several. I mean, Brittany Griner obviously comes to mind because she's still there, but there are other black women who are playing basketball. There are other black men who are there playing basketball. And it took this brother that I saw on this particular news story, it took him a while to get out. He did not know if he was going to make it back home to America. So there is a point that black people should care because black people are there. Kimberly?
Well, I would also argue, I hear what everyone's saying, but in terms of, two nuclear armed powers, which is the United States and Russia. So just on a human scale, the kind of catastrophe that could happen was further conflagration with U.S. between Russia. I think we should all be concerned with just being human beings. But outside of that, in terms of, the racist climate in Ukraine, I try to give context to why fascism has a foothold specifically in Ukraine and the ways that the U.S. is complicit in that by backing a coup in 2014. You saw these kind of emboldening of far-right elements. The Azov Battalion is a Nazi organization. It's formally integrated into the Ukrainian National Guard. So there's disrespect for Roma communities, for LGBTQ communities in Ukraine, and of course, African descendant people. So I think that it puts it into context why things are as heightened as they are there.
So what is the biggest threat that Russia poses to this country, Dr. Walker?
Well, obviously, what my colleague Kim just highlighted and when I kind of talked about earlier in terms of the traditional war, right? The last thing that, Kim just talked about in terms of nuclear, we talk about two nuclear powers, right? So, and you've heard some of the rhetoric from Vladimir Putin over the last couple of weeks and him making, clear threats about using nuclear armaments. That's end game for everyone on the planet, right? So no one wants
Russia
that.
does propose to approximately have 6,000 nuclear warheads.
Right, exactly. So we don't want to get in what I described earlier as a traditional war, which could essentially become a nuclear war. Because like I said, that's end game for everyone, right? So, and Putin, we've heard a lot of, like I said, the rhetoric the last couple of weeks, and it's kind of seemed like you've settled down here over the last week and a half. But certainly Russia as a military power presents a problem. But I also talked about some of the things I talked about earlier in terms of gas and oil, right? So we've seen some of the prices come down. But we know that, in terms of what Russia provides, worldwide in terms of oil makes a difference. It has an impact on global markets.
Yeah, oil and natural gases.
Right.
Shang, I want to ask you about the nuclear power that Kimberly talks about and Dr. Walker talks about here. What do you feel about that and Russia's nuclear power?
I feel like we've seen that Ukrainians Russia thought they were going to smoke the Ukrainians in 2 days. And the Ukrainians fought back and ended up being a month in before Russia was really putting a dent in them the way they really could. Putin will absolutely, if he's losing, even if he gets in an argument or he's mad about Americans jumping in, he'll go nuclear. So we already know he's a nutty buddy. He's not going to stop in Ukraine. He's going to definitely go after Poland. He's going to go after Hungary. He's not going to stop. He is crazy as a bag of cats. So we already know that. We know that he will definitely go nuclear because he's already threatened it, because he'd rather everybody die than them to lose.
Ooh, that's powerful. Dr. Milewski.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Brother Shang there, what he was saying. It is scary. It is quite scary. When you're talking about two nuclear powers, we've been in this territory before, probably not since the 1980s. Were heightened fears about nuclear buildup between in these two countries in particular. it's very confusing, I think, to the general public, because we spent a long time being sort of in a Cold War with Russia, and then the West sort of intervened in the way that it did to bring down, tear down the Berlin Wall and make changes and stuff like that. But that has to be put into context as well with all the stuff that's been going on. And it is kind of like terrifying on that level. I agree that he won't stop until, he didn't get along with President Obama. And that was a Black man who was head of the White House, head of state in this country. And we've also seen that he has interest in African Americans and the Black community.
Seems to have gotten along well with Trump, though.
Right. Yeah, that tells you a lot right there.
Like two crazies. Yeah, too crazy.
Yeah. So
well, I do think that we should push back on some of the framing of him just being a madman, and there's no actual logic at all to anything that Russia's doing, because we have to also look at NATO expansion and the roles that Russia's security concerns haven't really been prioritized, of course, by NATO as an aggressive unit, not necessarily defensive, and its expansion since the 90s. So I think we should also context that as well.
Yeah, that's very important. People around the world came together to support Black Lives Matter. The question is, should African Americans offer that same support to Ukraine? We're going to get on top of it when we come back on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack, and the business of being Black today is, should Black people care about the war in Ukraine? Please welcome the Associate Professor at the University of Central Florida, Dr. Larry Walker. Comedian and producer Shang Forbes, Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Stony Brook University, Dr. Zebulon Maletsky, and PhD candidate in Global and Sociocultural Studies at Florida International University, Kimberly Dawn Miller. Hi, everyone. So,
Hey.
People around the world did come together to support Black Lives Matter, and particularly after George Floyd was murdered at the hands of the police officer. Should African Americans offer that same support to other cultures globally?
Yeah. So, Tammi, I think that the answer to that question is yes. And I think when we talk about issues relating to Black Lives Matter, and we talk about whether it's here or abroad, right? We got a conversation about in there between about anti-Blackness. Right. So and historically, African Americans here in the United States come to support folks like our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. Right. So when it comes to fighting for democracy and various other in fighting against colonialism and other issues overall. Now, and once it's important to provide context of this issue, because Kim made a really good point about NATO expansion over the last several decades, et cetera, how Russia feels about that. And I know that, we've seen a lot of news accounts about Africans, how they've been treated. It's been a hard time. And even my colleague was referencing Black folks in terms of using a racial epithet used against them. And that was people in the Peace Corps, right? So people who are there to support the Ukrainians are getting the same treatment they would see outside of Ukraine in the United States. But I think we do have to, it's important to provide global support to other countries, under initiatives, when it comes to fighting certain issues, particularly, like I said, racism. But the issue in Ukraine, in terms of Russia invading Ukraine, we need a little more context to talk about not only anti-Blackness as relates to Russia and what's happening in Ukraine, how Black folks being treated, but also we talk about globally in terms of supporting issues, and like I said, particularly those of African descent outside the U.S.
Yeah, well, when you talk about Africans outside of the U.S., let's talk about Sudan for a moment here, who is in the middle of transitioning into a democratic power, but have received so much political warfare from Arab militia. So what about that? Why doesn't America care about Sudan, Dr.
Because they're people of color.
Go ahead, Shane.
Because they're people of color. I understand what you're saying, that Putin's not crazy. Putin, absolutely. There's a difference between, hey, I'm a little off and I lick windows and eat crayons. He is flat out. He flat out is, and we know it. And could he please put a shirt on? Every time I see him, he's out with his shirt off.
Taking selfies.
Yeah, just taking a selfie. So, yeah, and it's winter time. So the end of the day, I see what you're saying, Kimberly. I understand what you're saying. But end of the day, you can say, well, I don't know if he's crazy. If you go specifically target your troops to blow up hospitals with pregnant women, I'm not going to say you're sane. I'm going to say you're not even trying to fight the other soldiers. You're targeting civilians. So when you do that, you're in the crazy category. And also, all these other places of color, for some reason, America doesn't have this empathy and want to go out and save them too as much. But now, because it's honestly, this sounds racist, but it's a white on white thing sometimes. And the great Paul Mooney who said, "There's white people doing white people things," and that's what they're doing.
So when you mention it's a white people's thing, white people doing white people stuff. Here's the thing about that, Shane. When it happened, all the white people were shocked and surprised, and they were like, "Oh my God, this doesn't happen. This is not what we're used to in European countries. This is what happens in other countries."
Right.
Why was it such a shock, Dr. Maletsky?
Yeah, I don't know. People have identified, I think, in a way that's not necessarily racial about it. But the question that we're talking about is how African Americans see it and why should they care about it? I do think in that sense, I have heard that said. People said, it's two white countries fighting, sort of fighting each other. This is you really can't get more white either. Because the term Caucasian comes from, I think I said this earlier, from that region. You had Black Caucasians, though, believe it or not. You had a lot of Black ancestry there. There's some really interesting books about it that take it all the way up to, from that time. And then once the revolution in Russia happened, the interest in the Black question, or the Negro question, as they used to call it way back then, there's been a lot of interplay in terms of Blackness and Russia. So it seems to me Putin is a kind of like not true to the real legacy of what Russia has been involved in. Russia was never involved in the slave trade. Russia was, played a different role in terms of European sort of history and then politics. But in that region of the world, the question now, the name of the game is resources. Oil is a question. Our gas prices are going up. It's not for no reason. All of this destabilization, I think some other folk were talking about that before. All this destabilization affects all of us, affects us in our wallets, affects us in our pocketbooks, affects us at the gas pump. And Black people are mad as anybody else about what's going on at the gas pump.
Yeah, a little bit of everybody's mad about that. Kimberly, I want to go back to my original question about Sudan. Why doesn't America care about Sudan?
Well, I will say that in terms of the U.S. certainly had its position on the previous government of Sudan. It wasn't really a big fan of the government of Sudan because of its ties with Gaddafi and Libya specifically. And that brings me to my next point about how NATO bombed Libya, and it actually led to a market of slave trading Black African people. So this was a war that was supported by Obama, the first Black president, the ousting of Gaddafi. So we see the ways in which the West and NATO and U.S. allied forces have actually perpetrated war crimes against brown people, against Black people. So I think that in terms of thinking about sanity, and the insanity then goes all around, because the war crimes aren't just unique to Russia. So,
Dr. Walker, can you speak on the difference between those two fights and why America doesn't seem to care much about the one in Sudan?
Yeah, and Tammi, I think we need some context. Right, America, the United States government is not talking a lot about it, but members of the Congressional Black Caucus are, right? So, and I think, like I said earlier, context matters.
Well, that in itself is interesting that the Black Caucus is talking about it, but America is not talking about it. What does that say?
That's racism. That's global racism from a global perspective, Tammi. It's the same story. It's just a different year, just different day in terms, like I said, we talked about racism from a global perspective, right? And you saw a lot of reporters, Tammi, how many reporters the last couple of weeks were shocked on CNN and various other outlets when they saw some of the atrocities that happened in Ukraine. One thing I want to add, when we talked about Europe and war, let's not forget about the war between the Croats and the Serbs a few decades ago, right? So we've seen war and we've seen atrocities in Europe just a few decades ago. It wasn't that long ago. But like I said, when it relates to what's happening in Sudan compared to what's happening in Ukraine, it's just, once again, racism. And also, how do you value individuals' humanity? And we know that Black folks, whether we're here in the United States or globally, people don't see our humanity, and that's part of the issue.
Right, and I agree 1,000%. It's part of the issue. And sometimes I think people, at least Black folks in America, go, until you address some of those things, it's hard for me to feel I should reach out for you. And I saw some people saying, I'll go over there and I'll fight for Ukraine. It's like, yo, get yourself together here. It's hard for me to really look at the Ukrainian situation and go, yeah, you know what? I understand. It's like, no, I understand that America has to get their racism thing together first.
I do find it interesting that America sits on this high moral mountain when America itself lacks stability and morality when it comes to treating people fairly in this country.
Exactly. No moral center, but they're telling other people, you have a moral center. You better have a moral center. Well, you get a moral center. And then maybe you can have some high ground and talk to me. But until then, I think that obviously the gas prices, Black folks will definitely be upset about, like, man, $18 to go down the street for one, yeah, of course we're mad about that. But we take it from more of if you talk about humanity.
Yeah, the anger is definitely more deep rooted than the price of gas.
Exactly. There you go. You said it better. That's why you are the host. Boom, bam, bam.
We'll take a quick break and come right back, says the host on Business of Being Black. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Tammi Mack, and today the business of being Black is, should Black people care about the war in Ukraine? So Kimberly, I want to go to you on this. In an article written by Nicole Phillip, she wrote, even in times of crisis, sometimes the oppressed can also be the oppressor. What are your thoughts on her statement there? Sometimes the oppressed can often be the oppressor. That was a very interesting quote to me.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that's referring to the discriminatory treatment African and Afro-Caribbean students faced in Ukraine, I'm imagining, during a time of warfare. You wouldn't imagine a lack of empathy in such a time where people trying to flee towards safety. And I do think that, it's complex. Ukrainians can be victims. They can also victimize. And I think it speaks to that.
Yeah, it was, for me, I was just outraged when I heard that they were letting women and children in, but not the Black ones.
All right.
How can that possibly happen in the middle of wartime?
Because apparently Black little kids, they're not babies. And Black women, they're not women. I mean, that's why I think a lot of Black people in America, and plus, it's hard for a lot of Black people. We take unfortunately, we don't, go deeper under the surface. We're more, upset about a smack than we are a war sometimes, unfortunately. And that got more attention than it should have, but it did. But I think that the fact that they don't look at our humanity, and Dr. Walker, you said it perfectly. They don't see us as humans sometimes. So, and this is the wild part. There were people trying to get on the trains there. They had paid their money. They were there on time. It wasn't like they were lax about the urgency of getting there. And they still were like, no, we don't care if you're on time. We don't care if you're upstanding. We don't care if you're a good person. We don't care if you're a baby. The white babies get on first.
Dr. Maletsky, I was completely shocked that there was racism going on in the middle of war. What shocked me was the juxtaposition of what was happening here in America. Here in America, everyone was like, oh my God, Ukraine, we've got to help the Ukrainians. Oh my God. And we're going to go down and we're going to fight. And then you look at Ukraine and you hear these Black people going, they won't let us on the train. They're saying no to Black people to get on the train. And I'm sure many Black people, as I was like, I'm confused about how this is happening right now.
Well, if you want the support from the West, and a lot of people seem to want that, they want the United States to actually get involved and help fight the war, pretty much. But that's a real miscalculation to not understand how Blackness works in the United States. We drive the culture, we drive the so many different kinds of things in terms of ideas, as gentleman was saying. Dr. Walker was saying, the Congressional Black Caucus has weighed in. We have a long Black diplomatic tradition, going back to Ralph Bunche or other people who have, Frederick Douglass who was ambassador to Haiti at one point. we are Americans. We are
Speaking of
Americans
Haiti,
too.
America did nothing to help Haiti. We sat on the sidelines of Haiti. I shouldn't say nothing, but we sat on the sidelines for quite some time when we talk about Haiti.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, but that's the look at the line that we see through all of this. When America wants to step up and help, it seems like, well, it's a white nation and they're going through problems. But when it's people of color, they all of a sudden they have the memory of a goldfish. All of a sudden it's like, what are you talking about? Haiti? I don't even know what you're talking about. They know what they're talking. They know who they. Stop it. Look at me looking at you. Stop it.
Right. Stop it. Kimberly, is there any way to put this in context? Like, is there any way to say, well, the reason America doesn't help Haiti is because the reason America doesn't help Sudan is because, is there a reason that would bring logic to what we are witnessing?
Well, I think when we think about help, we have to kind of specify what we mean in terms of providing asylum. The U.S. certainly has a very anti-Haitian, anti-Black immigration and refugee policy. So I think that's one clear distinction we can draw, the ways in which Ukrainian refugees have been kind of welcomed with open arms, while Haitian
not only have they been welcomed with open arms, Kimberly, but they've been given scholarships to attend college.
And billions of dollars.
Right. Absolutely. That's a great point.
And yet Haitians were met with horses and people whipping them like they were like it's the 12 days a slave again. I mean, so I understand we can go through all the other different reasons, but when you get to the core of it, we know, but we don't want to like go there sometime, but we know it's because it's people of color. We know that white people want to help the white people over in Ukraine because they're white. Even if some of those Ukrainians might actually not be good people, doesn't matter. You got to help them. So,
Tammi, Tammi, I want to add something really quick. I think we need some context in terms of Haiti became the first Black, free nation in the Western Hemisphere, right? So the United States didn't help Haiti. And my colleague just talked about the whips at the Mexican-U.S. border, right? Yeah. But one of the things we had to keep in mind is that when Haiti became free, the United States, among other countries in Europe, punished Haiti by forcing them to pay reparations to France, right? So I think context is...
Well, how hypocritical is that?
Right. So
forcing somebody to pay somebody reparations.
Right. That's a whole nother show that we look forward to having conversations, right? But I also want to talk about when we talk about how Ukrainians treating African students or Black folks who are members of Peace Corps is how powerful anti-Blackness and racism is embedded in every system globally, right? So we talk about Haiti and Ukraine, we have to talk about this from a global perspective in terms of how racism is embedded everywhere in any country. Obviously, not just in European countries, but obviously there's certain issues where we talk about South Africa, right? For years prior to Black folks finally getting their freedom that was run by a white minority. So we talk about racism. I said we talk about Black countries or white. We know that the overarching issue is racism, and that's why we have to continue to dismantle.
Well, that's our number one export. That's one of our number one exports. We export movies, music. Yeah, we love your music, but we export racism. We export that thought process, and we really, really, really pumped up the volume by having Trump for 4 years. And obviously he was doing things that was racist. And his followers, the Trumplicans, they do things that are racist, and it's accepted. In fact, a lot of European countries started emulating Trump, if you look at it. So we know they're racist. So I'm not surprised that the Ukrainians are basically emulating what Americans do.
Yeah, Dr. Maletsky.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just thinking a lot of it's also the rise of fascism. This is a force that is of evil that has moved throughout history and in the world. You've seen it with Hitler in Germany, and you saw it with Franco in Spain. You see it with Mussolini in Italy. This is an export of Europe. Is this notion of fascism? It really comes from there, and this is what Putin's doing. The reason why we got to connect to it. Remember, African Americans fought in every single American war that's ever been waged in this country, abroad or otherwise. And we had a double V campaign, double victory, victory at home, victory abroad, in a war for what? Democracy. That is the threat that Ukraine poses to Russia, is their democratic sort of, I mean, racism aside and other problems that are happening. And it's not a small thing, but their efforts to try to have a democratic republic and a democratic society is what's threatening the most to Putin. And I'm not exempting them in any way. It's real personal for me. I don't know if you noticed, my last name is Maletsky. So I have ties in that region. Apparently, I got my DNA test back, Tammy, and it says that I had some kind of Ukrainian. I'm half African-American and half European Jew, which is Ashkenazic Jew, which is my father's side of the family. So it's hitting like real personal for me. People started asking me all of a sudden, "Oh, are you Ukrainian?" No one was ever interested. No one ever asked me anything about my last name before.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
So how long ago did you find out you were Ukrainian? When did the DNA test?
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Oh, now you go full blast. You said, so now you're in Ukrainian, huh? Is that what you are, huh?
Right.
The thing is, I got a TED Talk. I got a TED Talk about this.
Come right back on that, on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. We'll be right back, guys. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul. And the business of being Black today is, should Black folk care about the war in Ukraine? Please welcome Dr. Walker, Dr. Maletsky. Kimberly is on with us, as well as comedian Shang. Dr. Maletsky, you were just telling us that you had a DNA test and you have some ties to Ukrainians. So this is kind of personal to you, this fight is. Do you think that there are other Black people who have personal ties to Ukraine?
Yeah, there are actually, maybe not like biologically tied, but there's a brother, Terrell J. Starr, who does a Black Diplomats podcast. He's been in Ukraine, he's been on the ground, he's interviewing folks, he's got a lot of friends there and stuff like that. He's not, Ukrainian like in that way, but he identifies strongly with it and with the culture and the people there. There's other examples, I'm sure. I think I mentioned some of them from history. Yeah. I don't know, Drake. I got nothing. I'm not sure.
You said I don't know Drake.
Did you say Drake? Hold up. Drake.
I don't know, Drake 50. I don't know, somebody. I
guess so. Started from the bottom. Now we're here.
Right, exactly.
I know he's half Jewish and half Black. I don't know from where his side of his family is.
So I want to talk about this. When we talk about Black people caring about Ukraine, Hampton University took a special liking to Ukraine by announcing that it would give free tuition to 50 to 100 Ukrainian-born and current resident students this semester and next semester. So what are your thoughts on Ukrainian students receiving free housing and education from a historically Black college and university when some Black students are struggling to pay their tuitions? This is really hard for Black people to resolve in their minds, that we ourselves have issues and problems, but we have to extend ourselves to other people's issues and problems as well. It's kind of like the old saying Oprah Winfrey started on her show at one point, where you put your oxygen mask on first and then you help people. Are Black people at a space, Shang, where we've got our oxygen mask on and it's okay to help other people now?
No, we're not at that space. And by the way, this is breaking news. If they're giving away free tuition, I'm a Ukrainian. I didn't know if y'all. I don't know if
you had your DNA tested done.
I don't know if y'all can see that. I don't know if y'all can see that in me. And so I'm hoping I get a lot of free stuff. You see, I want a lot of free stuff just because. No, we don't have our oxygen mask on enough to help other people. It's like, I always see us in a situation like the Big Mama back in the day, where she was take care of the white baby before she take care of the Black baby. And I can't help you if you're drowning in a stream and I go to reach out for you and you smack my hand away. And that's what I see as Americans. Americans always want us to, here I come to save the day. And we always do that. And yet we don't get the reparations. Yeah, I said the word reparations that we deserve, but yet the Ukrainian students get a free ride out the blue. And you see some black students literally having 4 jobs. And I'm not exaggerating because I know a brother's doing it. 4 jobs just to keep up the pay.
Yeah.
So
when you gave the visual of, us reaching into the lake to pull somebody out, and you said we get our hands slapped, I was thinking, nope, they pull us in and jump out on our backs.
Oh, you took it next level.
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling about Black folks and our plight in America. We are oftentimes asked to help, but many times refuse to be helped. Dr. Walker, am I on to something here or not really?
Yeah, so I think that I have family and friends who are Hamptonites, graduate of Hampton. And I think in terms of Hampton's history is a little bit important. So historically, Hampton has done this, right? When the challenges throughout the world. So this is something they've done. So it's not something that for some people may seem out of the blue, but they've historically done this for years. However, Black folks also carry the highest amount of debt, student loan debt in the United States, right? So I think right here. So, and I'm never paying it off. So it's important to remember, like I said, Hampton has done this historically, but at the same time, there are a lot of Black folks out there and having a hard time staying in school. Shane, remember, I know, me being in school, I had to hustle to pay for my education, right? To finish my degree and do that for graduate school, right? So it's important to keep in mind that we need to make sure we're supporting our own, right? Particularly when we talk about how Ukrainians have been treating people of African descent in the nation who are there to help them. So I think I said context matters, but Hampton should be making sure they're taking care of their own first.
Well, I want to say this. Black people have, listen, y'all gonna think I'm all off base, but I'm gonna bring it home for you, all right? Mm-hmm. I tip for the race. I don't care if my waitress is bad. I don't care if my waitress is good. I tip for the race. And I do it because people oftentimes say that Black people we're not good people. We're known to not be good people for some reason or another. And so for me, sometimes I feel like maybe just because somebody is doing it to you, does it mean you have to do it back to them? So even if the Ukrainians are being disrespectful and treating us like we're not humans at the border and pushing us to the back of the bus in honor of Rosa Parks, it doesn't mean that we can't extend ourselves. We can't do the godly thing. We can't be good people in spite of what's been done to us, right, Kimberly?
Absolutely. I do think empathy is what's really needed right now. I think that we should also tie it back to how, we're putting more Ukrainians in harm's way by sending so much, billions and more millions on weaponry when it could go, like you're saying, to loan forgiveness for our own financial assistance here. So I think we can also connect our struggles that way and connect it to how our government responds to these crises.
Yeah, Shane, how do you feel about that? Like, do on to others as they do on to you? Like, where are we here? Should we not be good people just because people aren't good to us?
Yeah, you're asking the wrong one right here. Because I don't believe in that. I'm not a turn the other cheek type of dude. I'm just not. And I feel like, we always seem to want to be the angel. And they say, they go low, we go high. We always do that. We've been doing that. And how's that worked out for us? So if they go low, time to kick them in the face. A lot of
oh my.
No, I'm not condoning violence. I don't want anybody all of a sudden the Academy take my comedy award away.
Right.
But no, I'm saying it just seems like with Black people we're always have to take a high road. And I think the reason that people get exhausted with that is because we've been doing it for so long and we've been that way for so long that we get exhausted with it. And now we're like, so why should I? Why should I do it? Because they're not showing any empathy back to us or a model.
Why should we do it? Why should we extend our grace when we haven't had grace extended to us?
Well, I would encourage us not to be cynical about it. The Ukrainians' fight is our fight, believe it or not. Remember that Putin did interfere with the 2016 election. Right. And it used race specifically to do that. He looked at America, or his people looked at America and said, how can we create the kind of disunity and the kind of destabilization and try to find a sort of autocratic type leader a la Putin in the United States. And they looked and they said, you know what it is? Black Lives Matter and the African-American vote. And they created all these fake Facebook accounts that were supposedly Black Lives Matter activists. That means that they understand us almost better than we understand ourselves.
Wow.
If we're not thinking about how Black folk fit into this, and this is the only thing I could really offer everybody, why should we care about it? Because they cared about us in a negative way. And it created the kind of rise of white nationalism and all the white supremacist stuff that came up in the last 4 years. That was all from Putin. So their fight is our fight. You know what I mean? We got to educate them and say, don't go for the okie doke. You know what I mean? That anti-Blackness stuff that you think is the right way, it's the wrong way. And we can take time to educate, hopefully, bring this whole Caucasian thing full circle.
Full circle from the Caucasus Mountains to the Redwood Sea or waters or however the song goes. But that is the first time that I've heard the most simplistic reason why Black people should care. And that's because let's go to a break. Be right back. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. And the business of being Black today is, should Black people care about the war in Ukraine? Dr. Miletsky put it so simplistic, and I've never quite heard it that way. The Ukrainians' fight is African Americans' fight. One of the reasons why we have such a divisive country today is because of Putin's involvement in our election. We have two different people thinking the election was fraud and the other half of the country thinking the election was what it was. And he attacked specifically Black Lives Matter, which means their fight is our fight. I hear you, Dr. Miletsky. So great. About a month ago, hard right-wing extremists such as Nick Fuentes cheered on Putin at a white nationalist conference. Take a look at this.
On about Russia and Vladimir Putin is Hitler, and they say that's not a good thing. And can we give a round of applause for Russia?
To hear that Russia's invasion is galvanizing white nationalists in this country. Two members of Congress spoke at that meeting, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar.
Both of them. No, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by it at all, because I know that Russia, again, you can't get more white than Russia. I mean, wow. So I think that America wants to emulate, wants to be all white. And that's when you hear people say, go back to Africa and all these other idiot response we get. So I'm not surprised by when they, embrace anything that's, embracing whiteness.
Kimberly, is this disturbing?
Well, I think it's important to also understand that since 2014, Ukraine has actually been a recruitment ground for the far right. Many white supremacists from United States, Canada, and Western Europe are actually traveling to Ukraine to fight alongside these far right Nazi militias in eastern Ukraine. So I think it's important to understand that while Putin is also right wing, there's still these far right elements that are being attracted to from Ukraine. So we have to contextualize it that way.
Got it. Dr. Walker.
Yeah, and I think Kim made a really important point. And what you see from the video and Kim's point is the connection between white supremacy in the United States and abroad, right? Which has been the issue, the challenge for people of African descent for more than 400 years, right? So in terms of what Black people have to do as African Americans is we have to have one hand fighting for democracy, as my colleague from Stony Brook mentioned, fighting for democracy worldwide, but at the same time fighting for people to recognize our humanity and fighting against white supremacy, right? So Black folks' hands, both hands, we have to use both hands at all times. But this idea, like I said, of democracy is key. It's the cornerstone of our country. And some may argue because of, you talk about Vladimir Putin's interference in our election, has eroded that. We're seeing a number of challenges in the United States related to democracy and term freedom, the attacks against critical race theory and various other issues, right? So that's essentially began several years ago when Putin and many of his technocrats created many fake Facebook pages, etc. So it is essentially white supremacy and fighting against that, not only here, but also abroad.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry. I was
Go
going to
ahead,
say,
Shay.
if you haven't seen democracy being just torn down in America, just look at January 6th. Look at January 6th and how Republicans literally are siding with people who were jamming flags in cops' eyes. And this is a fact, and there's video of it, and they still and tell us, no, it was a picnic. There was a parade. It was just a parade that got out of hand. No. I've never been at a parade, and then all of a sudden somebody stabs somebody with a flag. No, that's not true.
Or damage people's desk, and they're looking for their computers and yelling, hang the vice president. I mean, that was
extra.
That's a bit more than a parade.
Agreed.
Dr. Miletsky, get in here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Shane, I was thinking the exact same thing. We had an insurrection in this country, where they tried to mount what amounts to really a coup, an attempted coup. And that's the kind of stuff we see, we usually are more associated with Europe or other places. And so, there's something going on in the world. It has to do also with the economies. It has to do with the rise of just right-wing stuff. It's time to settle the debate once and for all. White supremacy as a project is hopeless. Like it's not going to solve anything. And so people are still trying to identify with that. You have sort of the neo-Nazi kind of elements all around. It is very hard to understand, but it all comes basically down to anti-Blackness, as I believe Kimberly mentioned before, and that commitment to the idea that white is right. This cannot be allowed to happen again and again. We have to discredit. I really see a lot of this a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement. That's an international, global movement, a rethinking and a remaking of the world in a new way, an abolitionist movement that's trying to, get rid of, some of that bias. We've all seen that. A white guy gets pulled over, the cops pleading with him, please, sir, turn your engine off. Oh, no, it's okay. It's don't worry about it.
I do want you to talk about your festival and how your festival.
Oh, thanks. Oh, yeah, right. Little segue there. There is going to be on Friday of this week, Saturday of this week, April 9th, Blacks in Boston conference at Boston College. And it's free and open to the public. And everyone's welcome. It's going to be celebrating 50 years of Black studies at Boston College, which is my alma mater. And it's pretty much how I got involved in becoming a professor of African-American history. So I'm real proud of that, and I hope people might be able to join.
Congratulations. Dr. Walker, you teamed up with Roland Martin. Talk about it.
Yeah, so Tammy, on Thursdays from 6 to 8 Eastern Standard Time, you can catch me on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Talking issues, same here, politics, education, racism, global issues, etc. So check me out every Thursday, 6 to 8.
Kimberly, what is the mission behind Black Alliance for Peace?
So Black Alliance for Peace is an all-Black anti-war, anti-imperialist organization. And we really just want to spread the Black radical tradition of internationalism, as well as creating a world that we don't have to rely on these types of violent militarist conquests that lead to more death and destruction. So I advise everyone to go to Black Alliance for Peace. There's a whole resource guide on Ukraine.
You got it. Shang? Shang is Shangri.
Shang is Shangri. Yeah, it's my May 10th. My comedy special will be that was on Amazon, will be on Apple TV, and it'll be on all the different platforms except for Netflix, but soon. And also going to be working with Rock the Vote, Rap the Vote to make sure that we don't get totally spanked in the 2022 election and in the 2024 election. So we're going to be bringing a lot of heavy hitters that are in my field to get more awareness of how important these elections are. Even though some people say, I don't need to vote. Yeah, you do. Because if not, we're just going to get spanked.
So Shang, I have a simple question, yes or no answer here for each of you, but I'm starting with you, Shang. Should Black people care about this war in Ukraine?
To a point, but I would lean more no than yes.
Kimberly, should Black people care about this war in Ukraine?
Yeah, so we can oppose it.
Okay, oppose the war.
Oppose U.S. interference in more war.
Oppose the U.S. interference and world war. Dr. Walker, should Black folk care about this war in Ukraine? Give us directions.
Yes, I do believe we should care.
Okay, and Dr. Miletsky, should we care? Black people.
I think we should care. We're the Fannie Lou Hamers and the others who, have helped America realize what is true democracy. It comes from us. So we got to care. Unfortunately, Shane, I know it's a lot of work, but we got to care. No, we don't care. Who will?
I think Shane was on Kimberly's side there a little bit. Like, yeah, we got to care so we can oppose it. I think I can do that.
Cool.
So thank you so much for being on the show. Cocktails with the Queens is up next. Claudia will handle those ladies and you'll watch. Thank you for watching right now. Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack on Foxsoul.